Hi, and welcome to Long Live the Queen, where we talk about the women who made history. And by we, I mean the royal we, because it's just me. Today we're going to talk about Empress Matilda. Usually it's just me, but today I have my friend Art with me. Hi, Art.
Hello.
I'm
Have a
glad
nice
to have you
weekend.
here.
Well, thanks for having me on. It's kind of cool.
Yeah,
I
this will
think
be
I'm
fun.
a little bit hard to find information on, but I'm interested to learn more because I'm sure you're going to educate me.
That's the plan. That's the plan. We're going to talk about Empress Matilda.
I used to do martial arts with Christina, and I've always been interested in history. However, I have never studied this particular lady. She looks interesting.
She's from a
Also, looks
long,
like,
long time ago.
yeah, it's like she had a rather rough life. But
Yeah, it
continue.
was it was a struggle. Princess, because she wasn't an empress when she was born, Princess Matilda was born maybe in February 1102. We don't really know because she's a girl, and that is our best guess. Her parents were what you would call good royal pedigree. Her father was descended from William the Conqueror, the French conqueror who had relatively recently conquered the Anglo Saxons. So, England was currently Anglo Norman because the Normans had just taken over. French was the official language at court, and then her mother was descended from Alfred the Great, so an Anglo Saxon king. Their marriage was bringing together the new nobles of the Anglo Norman descent and the old nobles of the Anglo Saxon descent to try and unite the Saxons and the Normans. Their firstborn son would, in theory, unite their kingdom back to the split that had been caused between the Saxons and the Normans. But Matilda was their firstborn, and she was female, so she didn't really count. While in practice there was no law excluding women from the English throne, other than the fact that the French were in charge and the French did not like women rulers. It had just never been done in practice, so nobody was sure it would work. They were like, I don't know if a girl could do this job. She was tentative heir with hopes for boys to follow. And a boy did follow just the very next year. She has a brother, he's a year younger than her. So perfect.
Wasn't didn't she get some education from her mom, which was moderately unusual? Although apparently they didn't teach them how to write, but they learned how to read something.
Yeah, she did get some education because she was a princess, but she wasn't trained to be the king. But later she does get a really excellent education. So Princess Matilda had a little brother. His name was Prince William Adelin. And her parents' marriage didn't really seem like a happy one. They were together for political reasons.
Wasn't that pretty common in those days? So, the romantic marriage stuff didn't start until later
Yeah, that was
because,
super
well,
common. I mean, the hope was that love would follow an arranged marriage. Like, you'd have an arranged marriage and then you'd be like, oh, I do actually like this person. But they were just like, it is what it is. It's a legal contract. They weren't in love. They were trying to make an Anglo-Norman Saxon baby boy so they could have, like, the perfect English king. And they had done it. So no need to keep trying. They were done having kids. One girl, one boy. That's it. And there were rumors that Queen Matilda, the Matilda we're talking about, her mother was also named Matilda. And she had, word on the street was that she had taken her nun's vows to God before her marriage. That she had become a nun and then like, oh, psych, we need you to marry the king. And she was like, okay, never mind about that. And if that happened, her marriage wouldn't be legitimate in the eyes of the church. But she would claim her whole life that she had never taken nun's vows. It was just a rumor, and that her marriage was legitimate and her children were legitimate. But also, she had done her job supplying an heir, and she was done having babies. So she was like, peace out, you're welcome. Matilda grew up with 22 half-siblings because her father was sleeping with all of England, just about. And also her little brother, William Adelin, was her only full brother from both her parents. But they needed a job for Princess Matilda, who was now the spare, in heavy air quotes, because no one expected to need her. They had the boy they needed. And they certainly hoped they wouldn't need her, because who wants girls? Not them. At the ripe old age of 8, it was decided that she would be betrothed to Henry, king of the Germans and the Italians. She was 8, and he was about 23 or 24 at the time. But this was betrothal, not marriage. But still, I mean, I don't like that age gap. The young bride-to-be was being sent to Germany to be effectively raised by her future husband. And I don't love that dynamic. I don't even like that dynamic. But that's just what they did back then. It was a very prestigious marriage for the English family. They were joining an old, powerful European family. They were in it to win it, and they needed as many allies as possible. So the little Princess Matilda was sent to start her adult life at the age of 8. That's so crazy. 8 years old. Lost their
Yep.
minds.
I believe they were pretty careful about relations
As
at
careful as
that
they
time.
could be, yes. She didn't have any
Oh,
kind
yeah.
of like overseer coming with her or anything, but she wasn't married at 8 because she was way too young. But they were trying to make it as legitimate as they could, given her young age. So she was made Queen of the Germans just shortly after her arrival. She wasn't married yet, but they did crown her queen, even though she wasn't married yet, because they were trying to make it official without making the marriage itself official. And she wasn't accompanied by either of her parents or any of her siblings, not her brother or any of her 22 half siblings. Because while her mother was done having children, her father wasn't, and he was just babies, 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 everywhere. Lots of kids. After Matilda was crowned Queen of the Germans, she was sent by her husband to live with a bishop and be trained to be a ruling queen. This is where she gets her education. It was Empress school. Because her husband to be had his heart set on becoming the Holy Roman Emperor, and he needed this 8-year-old to learn how to be an empress. She stayed at this live-in Empress school, kind of a finishing school for her, for the next 4 years until she was of legal age to marry. But that's just 12 back then, so gross. But now she's a legal adult at 12. In 1114, Queen Matilda, at the age of 12, married 28-year-old King Henry V. The age gap is uncomfortable, but it was completely legal and acceptable at the time, and legal is not a synonym for moral, and it never has been, so just is what it is. Legal's legal, I guess. This is another story for another time, but the short story is that the Pope was not the biggest fan of Matilda's husband. He was like, I don't think this guy should be the Holy Roman Emperor. I don't think he's got it. So in 1116, when Matilda was 14, the couple marched over the Alps with their army to confront the Pope in Italy. And they made it to northern Italy and then paused to kind of get northern Italy under their control. Had like a little mini business vacation in northern Italy. And the following year, they marched on to Rome to confront the Pope. But the Pope was not interested in a parley, so he fled. He was out of there.
In those days, popes had a lot of issues with surviving.
Yeah, it wasn't, you didn't love it when the army marched into town necessarily. Especially if you weren't sure if they were friendly armies.
Well, if you'd been kind of grumpy with the head of the army, it's unlikely he's going to be very friendly
Yeah, if you
with
were
you.
like, hell no, you can't be Holy Roman Emperor, and then he's like, well, me and my army are coming to talk to you, then you gotta book it.
Pretty much.
Matilda's husband entered Rome, and he was crowned Holy Roman Emperor, a position that he felt was his birthright, but not by the MIA Pope. So it was official on paper because he was crowned the Holy Roman Emperor, but because it hadn't been done by the Pope, it lacked religious validity. The Pope was like, yeah, I mean, you're like the Holy Roman Emperor with like an asterisk after it. Like, also, you weren't crowned by the Pope, so that's a problem.
Only in paper.
Yeah. Technically official, but lacking some bits. And Henry had to return to Germany to suppress uprisings that were occurring. So he left his 16-year-old wife, the now Empress Matilda, in charge in Italy, and he returned to Germany. That's a big job for a 16-year-old. I don't know that I could have been acting Empress at 16, but she did have that Empress school, so she had the schooling for it at least.
Also, how much actual power did she have, or was male there that actually
Oh, I'm sure
ran
there was
things?
tons of males there, but she kept some sense of control. Like, people at least pretended to listen to her, so it's impressive for a sophomore in high school. That same year, Matilda was being Queen of Italy, and using that education she also got some bad news. Her mother, Matilda Sr., had died at the age of just 37 or 38.
What was the normal age for that time for women?
Women, it was about 34-ish. Maybe a little earlier, 30 to 35 would be the range probably, but it was usually in childbirth. And her mother had stopped having children, so her big risk factor was gone. Men often died in war, and women often died in childbirth. And if they didn't, then your lifespan could be longer. So this was longer than the average lifespan, but not as long as she would have probably hoped for someone who had stopped having children 20 years before. Just 2 years later, things took an even darker turn over in England because the King of England was also the Duke of Normandy. Over on the continent, there was a lot of crossing of the English Channel from Normandy to England for various reasons. And one of these crossings took place in 1120. Both the king and his heir, William Adelin, were crossing the English Channel. They had two ships. One was the ship of the older generation was crossing in, and it was the more serious business boat. It was the grown-up were being responsible over on this boat. And the other was the white ship. And it was kind of a party boat for the younger people, including the heir, some of his half-siblings, and some of his cousins. It's all the younger generation. They're all late teens, early 20s, and everyone on that ship was real drunk. Real drunk. And by everyone, I mean even the crew. Everyone on the ship was super drunk. One of Matilda's cousins, Stephen, refused to get on the boat, saying that he hadn't been feeling well, but also it could have just been good sense because everyone, including the captain, was super drunk. So on this boat, as teenagers sometimes do, they were like, faster, like we gotta beat the old people. You know how teenagers can be, right? But everyone, including the captain, is drunk, so this went exactly as poorly as you would expect. The boat crashed, and it crashed pretty epically. The ship was torn in half. It hit a rock that was just under the water. They were going fast. The boat cut in half, and people were in the freezing water because it was wintertime. And it was like fast-paced Titanic sinking vibes. It didn't take as long as the Titanic took to sink, but that was the vibe. People all over cold water. The heir apparent, William Adelin, was put immediately into a lifeboat. Gotta save the heir. That's number one priority. If this boat's going down, we have to save the future King of England. One of the heir's sisters, one of the prince's sisters, half-sisters, was calling out for her brother in the darkness. And depending on whose story you believe, she was either pleading for him to come back for her, or she was yelling at him that he was an effing coward for leaving her behind. So it was either very like, please come save me, or it was like, you better come save me, or I will kill you, because this is messed up. And it doesn't really matter how it went down. However it went down, the prince made his guards turn back for his half-sister. Whether she was mad or she was just begging, he was like, no, you have to go back for my sister. I like my sister. Unfortunately, just like with the Titanic, there were a lot of people in the water, and they quickly overcame the lifeboat, causing it to sink.
Yep.
Killing the heir to the throne of England. And the only survivor of the white ship disaster was a butcher that was on board, who managed to make it out of there. So the king was without a male heir, and without a wife to provide him with one. Empress Matilda was now the female heir to the throne of England, but nobody was sure that was a thing that could be a thing. Queen at this point still meant wife of the king. It's like a queen by herself wasn't really anything without a king. Empress Matilda's father decided to remarry almost immediately. He was like, shoot, I gotta get a boy right now. He married Adeliza of Louvain. Adeliza, Empress Matilda's new stepmother, was 1 year younger than Matilda herself. Adeliza was 18, and her new husband, the king, was 53. So, at least she's 18, but also a gigantic age gap. He's marrying someone who's the same age as his son who just died. If you've watched any of The House of Dragon, it's a very like Rhaenyra, Alicent, Viserys vibes. And if you haven't, just let that go right past you, because it won't make any sense if you haven't watched it. King Henry was still trying to replace his son, so he needed a young wife, but his daughter was always his like backup option. She was plan B. Like if he didn't have another boy, there was always Matilda, good old Matilda, standing in there just in case. In 1125, Matilda's husband, the emperor, died. She was only 23 at this point, and her husband was only 37. He probably died of cancer. He'd probably been sick for some time, but there wasn't really any treatment for cancer back then, so if you got it, you got it, and that's just how it was. Matilda was in a precarious situation. She had never had children with the emperor, even though they had been married for over a decade. They'd never had children, and some people think it was maybe because of his cancer, but for whatever reason, they didn't have children. And so she had no reason to stick around the empire because someone else was going to be Holy Roman Emperor. She didn't have kids to watch over there, so she was going home. And her father was also in a precarious situation. He didn't have a male heir, so he was like, yeah, come home. Definitely come home. We got to get you ready to maybe be queen because I don't know if I'm going to have another kid.
Would he have ordered her home, or would she have just said, "Hey, I want to go home"?
I think it was a mutual decision. He could have ordered her home, although she was a dowager empress at this point, so she could have said no. But if she had any hopes of becoming the Queen of England, she probably would have had to go home and make nice with her dad. But I think they both agreed, like, you're in a tough spot, I'm in a tough spot. How about we team up in England? And she was like, okay, sure. He orchestrated a gathering in which he had all his nobles show up and swear allegiance to his daughter in lieu of any male heirs. So he basically said, look, if I have a boy, obviously that boy's going to be king. But if I don't have a boy, I want you all to promise that you'll follow my daughter, even though she's a girl. And they were going to make her King of England because, like I said, Queen of England didn't really have the same definition that it has now. You couldn't just be the queen. The queen was the wife of the king, so she was going to be the King of England. And there was pressure put on these nobles. They didn't all want to swear allegiance to a woman, but eventually they all did, begrudgingly, some of them. Some of them had to be really talked into it. Matilda made a really good friendship with her new stepmother. They were, after all, about the same age. And again, if you watch House of the Dragon, it's very Rhaenyra and Alicent. Part of the deal with Matilda coming home and being made heir presumptive was that her father was again in charge of whether or not Empress Matilda got remarried. And as heir presumptive, she would be required to get remarried. Part of the oath given to her was that they would support her and her heirs. So she needed a baby, and better yet, a son. And the way the oath worked out, like if you go word for word through the oath, it seems like they could have chosen to have her son be the ruler instead of her. Even if her son was still a baby at the time, they promised to either follow her or her son that she didn't have yet. So she definitely needed to get a husband and some babies, or this whole queen thing was not going to happen. 2 years after this whole oath party, Matilda's father picked out her new husband. Her new husband was going to be Geoffrey Plantagenet. He was the future Count of Anjou, and a prospective good leader. On paper, he had potential. He was handsome, athletic, he was good at war, but he was also only 13, and Empress Matilda was at this point about 24. She was almost twice his age, and the entire time he had been alive, she had been an empress. So this 13-24 age gap is more than 11 years, because it's 13 and like a much older than 24.
And a big downgrade. Didn't she like her first husband?
She did, and he was an emperor. This guy was going to be a count. He wasn't even a count yet. His father was a count. So it wasn't, yeah, it wasn't, she was like, oh, this is what I came back for? This guy? This 13-year-old here that's maybe going to be a count someday? Yeah, she wasn't too pumped, but you know what? Neither was he. He was like, who is this old lady? Like, she's going to die in like a year and a half, and then what? Like, she's 24. Like, she only has like a decade left, maybe.
And she hasn't had children yet.
Nope. And she was married for 11 years, so why hadn't she had children? Was this a her thing? Was it a him thing? We don't know, but it would have been blamed on her for sure. But neither of them got to say anything about it because it was up to their fathers. They weren't asked their opinions, but neither was pumped. They were like, oh, all right. So now it's questionable decision time. It was the custom of the time to send brides to the grooms to get married, because it was generally accepted that the grooms were more important and needed to be kept safer, because they were usually the heirs to the things. But Matilda was the King of England's only surviving legitimate heir. And to go to Anjou, where her husband resided, she would have to take a similar trip to the one that had just killed her brother, only in reverse. Back from England to the continent.
Wasn't the agreement also that he could not be king?
Yes, he could not be king. She was going to be the King of England, and he was going to be her queen consort. I mean, not really, but that was the general idea. He was going to be the Count of Anjou. And
Hmm.
she was going to be the Duchess of Normandy and the King of England. In 1128, 26-year-old Matilda married 15-year-old Geoffrey Plantagenet. The following year, Geoffrey's father, the Count of Anjou, decided he was going to get married too, and he was headed for Jerusalem to marry Jerusalem's queen. And he was just going to hand over Anjou to his son. He's going to be like, you know what, you can be count now. I'm not dead, but I'm going to Jerusalem to be married to the queen over there. So here, have Anjou. So her husband was now the young Count of Anjou. And the people accepted it because, I mean, the old count was already alive. He was just like, I'm out of here. Here's my son. Thank you very much. Within the first 2 years of their marriage, though, they were separated. They didn't get along, Matilda and Geoffrey. But I feel like no one's really surprised by that. They didn't want to get married in the first place. And now he's 17 and she's 28 and they're not getting along.
And she's had no children.
Still, yeah, well, they didn't get along, so certain things have to happen to have children and those things were probably not happening. Matilda's father tried to reconcile the couple. She would need a husband and heirs if she was going to be the queen/king of England. The year after the separation, the king gathered all his nobles again to swear again because he also still didn't have any more children. So he was like, look, I need you guys to swear you really will promise to follow her because she's your only option at this point. And they were all like, yeah, we'll follow her. It's fine. We got this. And maybe having something to do with this, or maybe because she understood the assignment about the heirs, Matilda reconciled with her husband the following year. And that reconciliation seemed to be legitimate because the following year, Matilda was pregnant. In 1133, Matilda, at the age of 31, gave birth to her first baby, Prince Henry. And this would have been dangerous because if you remember, the life expectancy of women was between 30 and 35 because of having babies. Now she's just starting to have babies at 31. So this wasn't going to be as easy as it would have been in her 20s.
True, but she also didn't start having babies at 16,
That's
which
true. That's true.
would
That can also
wear.
be dangerous, yes. The goal would really be like 24, 25, 26, but
Yep.
32 was better than 12, so. Or 31, I guess. 31 was better than 12, so that's good. And the following year, Matilda had her second baby at the age of 32, that she named Geoffrey, probably after his father. This birth did not go as smoothly as the first birth. Having a baby at 32 was harder for her than having a baby at 31. Matilda almost died having little Geoffrey. And they were so sure that she was going to die that she wrote her will and was given last rites. Like, they were like, yeah, she's not going to make it. But she didn't die. She pulled through. But it was real close. Everyone thought she was going to die. After this traumatic birth experience, she decided that she wanted more responsibility from her father, and she asked for more control over Normandy. She was like, look, I'm going to be the Duchess of Normandy. Let me practice there. I can do my Norman thing, learn how to be a queen, show you that I can do it, show the people I can do it. You can stay in England. There'll be less crossing. It'll be safer. It was a pretty good idea. But her father became angry and accused her of trying to push him off his throne and into his grave. He was like, how dare you? I'm still alive. You're just trying to shove me into my grave and just be the Duchess of Normandy. But I think she was just like, saw what happened with her husband and his father and was like, this was a good way to transfer power when he was still alive. But her dad did not dig it, and a feud broke out between the King of England and his only heir, his daughter Matilda. But it sort of makes sense. Her father had reasons to be suspicious, not necessarily of her, but him and his brothers, if we delve deeper into history, his brothers, the sons of William the Conqueror, fought at times to the death over the throne. So he came with a rich family history of murdering your own brother to try and become king. So when his daughter was like, hey, how about you let me have Normandy? He was like, what the? No, I don't think so. That seems like a bad plan.
Yeah, and that happened a lot in those days, which
Yeah.
probably contributed to the fact that women often were not rulers
Yeah.
because even though the king didn't get involved in direct combat a lot, They usually had a reputation for having been able to fight, which makes it more likely for other
Exactly.
people.
And during this time, the king still did get in some direct combat. It wasn't totally, I mean, now they would never, but back then it was still, sometimes they did. And definitely a woman wouldn't be able to do that. They couldn't even ride astride on a saddle. Like, who's going to go into battle side saddle? Like, that just doesn't
Yeah,
work.
and also it's uh, you may not have messed with swords. I did a little bit, and they're heavy,
Yes.
and body strength counts for a lot.
Yeah.
And women, no matter how well trained, just don't have the same mass
Yeah, they'd have to
ability.
think outside the box. Maybe give her some, like, throwing weapons or something. I don't know. But yeah, they were like, how's she going to lead an army? Like, what's going to happen then? Like, that's not going to happen.
Yep, they're not going to believe that she can lead if she hasn't fought herself.
Yes.
We know that that's not necessarily true, but in those days,
Definitely
you know,
not. I could kill a
mythical
bitch
belief.
if I had to. Later that same year, before they reconciled, the king died. And we don't know exactly of what, but word on the street was he died from eating an excess of lampreys, which was an eel that he was very fond of. Likely he had a type of food poisoning, listeria, which is sort of topical right now because we just had a
Mhm.
listeria outbreak. I mean, not us in our family, but like in our country. Our family's fine.
It keeps coming up every so often.
Yep, yep. And that might be what killed Matilda's dad. He really liked eels, and he just chowed down and likely got a bacterial infection from food poisoning, and he died.
Yeah, sanitation was not quite the same in those days as it is today.
Exactly.
That food handlers, that's
Especially if all you want to do is eat eels and more eels and more eels before there's
well,
any kind of refrigeration.
yeah, usually taken from very polluted waters. Eels are bottom feeders, I believe.
Yeah. It probably wasn't great, but he loved them. He thought they were delish. He was like, this is my food. I love them.
More for him.
Matilda was in Anjou. She was recovering from her labor and delivery, so she wasn't able to go to England when her father died. She was able to make it to Normandy because that was Anjou and Normandy were both in France. So that was a land journey. It was much closer. So she made it to Normandy because she was like, well, now I'm the Duchess of Normandy now that my dad's dead, so I'll go up there. And she just kind of waited in Normandy for her lords to show up and be like, my queen. And she was just like waiting because what else are they going to do? They had said twice they were going to make her the queen. So she just waited patiently. And if you remember Matilda's cousin Stephen, the one who wouldn't get on the boat because he said he wasn't feeling well, he saw his moment. And it seemed like this had been his plan all along because to get news that his uncle had died and arrive in England just a week after his uncle's death is a nearly impossible feat at that time. Like a week to get everything together, get on your ship, get across the channel. He had to be ready to go. He had to have like spies that were like, look, the king might die soon. He's not looking good. He eats a lot of eels. Because it was just a week later, he was there. And the nobles were like, oh, well, this is a guy. He could be the king. Yeah, let's do that. And Matilda didn't appreciate that her cousin had just usurped her throne while she's just trying to recover from having the two heirs that she was required to have in order to become queen. But she stayed in Normandy and just kind of chilled and just like waited it out, tried to check the temperature. Just like, well, I still want to be queen, but this isn't going as planned. And she was pregnant again, so there's only so much she could do. This episode was brought to you by my Patreon supporters, my patrons, and you've reached the end of part 1. So the rest of the episode will be on Patreon. So join us over there if you want to hear those. And you can join for free and get ad-free versions of all my videos. So see you there. Will be remembered.
Thanks for listening.